Athens, Greece, 1940. The silence in the room is oppressive, just the dull, heavy ticking of a grandfather clock. As you read the threatening note the Italian ambassador has just handed you. Roused from your bed at 3 a.m., the meeting began comically. Originally, you were mistakenly told the French ambassador was downstairs, only to be startled when it turned out to be the Italian. Even now, your hair is dishevelled, and you are clad only in a nightshirt, a flowered dressing gown and slippers. You are the Prime Minister of Greece, John Metaxas, and the day you have long feared and tried to prevent has finally come. Italy is going to invade. Your hands tremble slightly as you put down the ultimatum. Tears glisten in your eyes as you imagine the suffering Greece's future could hold in store. Softly you reply, "So, this is war." The Italian replies soothingly that bloodshed can be avoided. Don't waste your countrymen's lives in vain. Order your armies to submit, and Mussolini will be merciful. Raising your hand, you cut him off mid-sentence. There is no need for you to continue. For one thing, I will never issue such an order, and for another, your ultimatum is expiring in almost 1 hour. Your voice begins to rise with defiance and passion. There is no time. I could not make a decision to sell my own house on a few hours' notice. How do you expect me to sell my country? Rising from your chair, you glower down at the Italian and smash your palm onto the table with a loud bang. Reverting to Greek, you yell, "Ochi!" No, in his face. As the ambassador is thrown out, you start frantically calling your generals. Greece has fought for her freedom before. It shall do so again. Rumours of that shouted no will soon spread around all of Greece and inspire its people to resist. Mussolini has just kicked another hornet's nest. I'm your host, James Barton. Welcome to Forgotten Wars.
This country is at war with Germany.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
Eagle 1, first strike, you have permission to engage the target.
In the first few hours after our servicemen went to the rescue of young Americans and of democracy in Grenada,
Damals uns ausgebildet. Wollen wir 4 Jahre Nazi.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. As we saw last week, the early years of World War II were not going well for Mussolini. His forces had performed embarrassingly poorly against an already collapsing France. Now his Egyptian campaign was turning into a humiliating defeat. Rather than learning lessons about prioritizing his scant resources, not being so overly ambitious, whether Italy should really be in the war at all, he decided yet another conflict was needed to revive his flagging prestige. Yugoslavia, Greece, Turkey, Switzerland, Malta, and even Iraq were all mentioned, as Mussolini leapt from one vague and grandiose scheme to another. A disgusted Italian general complained about, quote, the disorder, lack of preparation, and muddle in every sphere. Someone will say, 15 days, we must be ready to march against Yugoslavia, or in 8 days we will attack Greece from Albania. As easily as saying, let's have a cup of coffee. The Duce hasn't the least idea of the difference between preparing war on flat terrain or in mountains, in summer or in winter. Still less does he worry about the fact that we lack weapons, ammunition, equipment, animals, and raw materials. End quote. That it would be Greece where the blow would finally fall was mainly thanks to the influence of his son-in-law and foreign minister, Galizio Ciano. Ciano was only 33 and a feckless dilettante to boot, over-promoted in a blatant act of nepotism. A Roman riddle asked whether this playboy could do anything well. The answer was They made an excellent cookhold, though on second thoughts, even for that, Ciano needed the help of his wife. From an aristocratic family, he was even more obsessed with sex than even Mussolini. His despairing father dressed him in a sailor suit until he was 15, just to try and stop him from accompanying his friends to the brothel. But it was no use. Ciano grew up addicted to chasing women, to the exclusion of all else. He did serve in the invasion of Ethiopia, even winning a silver medal for valour, though behind his back they said that he should be awarded a gold medal for his bravery in accepting the silver one. As foreign minister, though, he was a disaster. Foreign affairs took second place in his life to his love affairs. Rather than meeting his ambassadors or reading their dispatches, he preferred to lounge on the beach at Ostia, ogling his entourage of film starlets, or to parade himself at the golf club in the company of his harem. When he did go on foreign trips, he demanded diplomats act as his pimps. On a visit to Germany, he asked Hitler if he could visit the notorious official Nazi brothel, the Salon Kitty. A shocked Führer later denounced him as a disgusting boy. Joseph Kennedy, America's ambassador to Britain, and himself a rampant womanizer, recounted that, quote, "I have never met such a pompous and vain imbecile. He spent most of his time talking about women, and spoke seriously to no one. For fear of losing sight of the 2 or 3 girls he was running after, he pinched bottoms with abandon, and blithely scratched himself in places where Ribbentrop would have endured an infestation of fleas without moving a muscle." End quote. This comic opera character had a ruthless side, however. To strengthen his own position, he fed Mussolini's megalomania and encouraged his worst instincts. He had already persuaded the Duchy into the pointless invasion of Albania, claiming it would equal Hitler's triumphs. As Albania was already an Italian puppet state, it provoked international ridicule rather than burnishing Mussolini's laurels. The King of Italy even complained, quote, that the nation had gained only a few worthless rocks. End quote. Still, Ciano had given his boss an easy success, and poor Albania became his personal fiefdom. Now he began whispering in Mussolini's ear again that another small war in the Balkans was just what the doctor ordered. An invasion of Greece, Ciano insisted, would be, quote, useful and easy, as the Greeks had no will to fight. One hard blow, and they would utterly collapse in a few hours. End quote. Rarely has someone been so wrong. This siren song fell on fertile ground, as Mussolini already had a grudge against Greece. Back in 1923, an Italian general and his aides were killed on the border between Greece and Albania. Mussolini blamed the murders on the Greek government, probably wrongly, and briefly occupied Corfu. Though it was resolved, there was a feeling of unfinished business on his part. Added to this, Mussolini was upset once again with his frenemy Hitler. He believed the Balkans were his sphere of influence to dominate as he pleased, but recently Germany had been basing troops in Bulgaria and Romania. Even worse, his ally hadn't even bothered to tell the Italians first. He flew into a rage, ranting that, quote, Hitler always faces me with a fait accompli. This time I'm going to pay him back in his own coin. He will find out from the papers that I have occupied Greece. In this way, the equilibrium will be re-established. End quote. Ciano began turning up the pressure on Greece, creating his very own martyr to supposed Greek brutality out of whole cloth. According to Ciano, Daut Hoxha was, quote, a man animated by great patriotic spirit, end quote, who'd been killed by Greek agents while attempting to liberate the Tismoria region of Greece for his fellow Albanian countrymen. Actually, Hoxha was a bandit, cattle thief, murderer, and rapist, with a long history of extreme violence and criminality. He had little interest in liberating anyone, and had actually been beheaded by a rival gang of Albanian bandits after he raped their leader's sister. Ciano left that part out, of course. Can't ruin a good story. The Duchy tested the Greeks' resolve, ordering his bombers to attack Greek ships and Coast Guard stations. In a particular outrage, an Italian submarine torpedoed the Greek cruiser Eli as she lay anchored off the island of Tenos during one of the country's holiest days, the Feast of the Assumption. While Metaxas tried to hide Italy's responsibility to avoid war, blaming unknown submarines, the Greek people guessed who was responsible. The Duchy's bully boy tactics backfired massively. His own ambassador at Athens warned him that, quote, "The attack had united a people, deeply ribboned by unbridgeable political differences and old, deep-running political hatreds, imbuing them with a firm resolve to resist us." End quote. Still, Mussolini was extremely confident of victory, boasting that this would be his blitzkrieg to rival, if not eclipse, Hitler's victories in Poland and France. Behind the scenes, however, everything was not going well, and most of the problems were his own fault. The overall blueprint for the invasion of Greece, codenamed Contingency G, had been worked and reworked for the past 3 months, 100 times, and still there was no final decision on strategy, tactics, or even what the primary objectives were. The confusion reflected the indecisive and mercurial nature of Mussolini himself, who sometimes changed his mind on a subject 5 times in 15 minutes. The only thing they'd agreed on was they would need 3 months' preparation, 18 to 20 divisions, and a campaign of at least 6 months, if not a year, to achieve. In his haste to answer Hitler's occupation of Romania, Mussolini was expecting 9 divisions, including 1 useless cavalry division, to do the same job with advance notice of just 2 weeks, with victory occurring in less than a month. He then picked possibly the worst general in all of World War II, and that is really saying something when you're up against contenders such as Britain's Arthur Percival or America's Lloyd Friedenauer to lead the invasion. Sebastiano Visconti Prasca had only recently been promoted to general, and he was inexperienced and had never commanded a large army in battle before. He made up for this with overconfidence on a truly epic scale. No one has loved themselves more than Prasca loved himself. A fanatical bodybuilder, he was incredibly proud of his manly physique, spending hours training and admiring his muscles in mirrors. He was such a gym rat that he actually neglected his military duties in favour of working out. Many times during his short period in command, his aides had to wait for crucial decisions while he was lifting weights. He boasted to Mussolini that his operation was as perfectly planned as humanly possible, and promised to finish off Greek forces and capture the port of Preveza in 10 to 15 days, after which Athens would fall a week later. He assured Mussolini that, quote, "Greeks don't like to fight," end quote. I have to wonder if he'd ever heard of Alexander the Great. Between them, Mussolini and Prasca's incompetence led to the Italian army being outnumbered, despite having the far larger military and population. The Duchy had taken the ridiculous decision to demobilize 300,000 soldiers and 600,000 reservists for the harvest, despite the fact that he was already fighting the British in Egypt and was about to start yet another war. He had also failed to win over the Bulgarians to join in the invasion, meaning the Greeks would only have to concentrate on the Albanian front. Prasca's plan called for rapid reinforcements, yet even he admitted that the sheer inadequacy of Albania's harbours, the mountainous terrain and the poor state of the Greek transport network meant that this was impossible. Prasca even turned down the offer of more divisions, as he was afraid of being replaced by a more senior general if he had more men. Despite all of this, Mussolini still might have succeeded if it wasn't for the heroism of the Greeks themselves. They weren't going to surrender, they were going to fight, and fight brilliantly. Greece was not a stable country between the wars. It had changed government 23 times and endured 13 coups. It was a deeply divided nation, sullenly under the rule of the least charismatic of the Balkan dictators, John Metaxas. He was squat with a round face and circular glasses, looking more like a provincial accountant than a dictator. An unlikely figure to rally Greek resistance against the Italians and unite his country. Italy's ambassador to Athens, Emanuele Grazzi, even claimed that, quote, "If in all Greece there was a single man who really had a feeling of affection for Italy, that man was John Metaxas." End quote. He had ruled Greece for the past 4.5 years, having persuaded the weak-willed King George that the only way to face the mounting threat of communism within the country was to install a dictatorship, with Metaxas himself as head of the government. His regime deliberately bore a resemblance to fascist Italy and Hitler's Germany. His soldiers had adopted the familiar stiff-arm salute, and Metaxas had created a secret police modelled on the dreaded Nazi Gestapo. A national youth group, the EON, imitated the black shirts and the SA, marching stiff-legged down city streets and singing blood-curdling songs of conquest. Ironically, in the land where democracy had been born, he banned the works of Plato and other, quote, "subversive hymns to democracy," end quote, while exiling his enemies of his regime to out-of-the-way islands. Though he was certainly a dictator, Metaxas was more of a low-grade thug compared to the brutality of Mussolini and Hitler. Yet he was a patriot, and his famous yell of "No!" had inspired the nation, while the relentless bullying by Italy had united Greeks against them. Probably the first time they'd been united since the First World War. They knew they would be a hard fight. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But a captured Greek prisoner summed up the popular mood, quote, "We are sure that we will lose the war, but we will give you the spanking you need," end quote. Metaxas had also been preparing for an invasion from Albania since the Italians occupied it. Greece was in fact far more prepared for this showdown than Mussolini's legions were. The Duchy's plan to keep Hitler and the Germans in the dark about the invasion had failed completely, mainly due to Ciano being so incompetent that he revealed it accidentally on a golf course with the German ambassador. The Führer raged that, quote, "How can he do such a thing? This is downright madness. If he wanted to pick a fight with poor little Greece, why didn't he attack in Malta or Crete? It would at least make some sense in the context of the war with Britain in the Mediterranean." End quote. The whole affair would be a pig's mess, he claimed, that he would have to dig them out of. I can't say he was wrong. He frantically headed to Italy by train to try and stop the whole affair, but he was too late. On the anniversary of Mussolini's march on Rome, Italian soldiers crossed the border and invaded Greece. He snarled to Ciano that, quote, "I shall send in my resignation as an Italian if anyone objects to our fighting the Greeks," end quote. An angry Hitler managed to keep hold of his temper as Mussolini greeted him, yelling, "Führer, we are on the march. Victorious Italian troops cross the Greco-Albanian border at dawn." The Italian plan involved 3 prongs. In the south, they would advance along the Adriatic coast into Greece, while in the northeast, 2 columns advanced into the Pindus Mountains, one aiming for the port of Salonika on the North Aegean Sea, the other heading deep into central Greece. The Italian soldiers were so confident of victory, they were carrying silk stockings and contraceptives while singing, Nothing can stop us. Our lips swear we shall win or we shall die. This confidence didn't survive the first couple of days. The heavens opened, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained. Endless, pounding, icy rain was turning even brooks into treacherous torrents, and what passed for dirt roads into impassable quagmires. For 4 days the Italians slogged eastward, laboriously crossing streams and rivers swollen to twice their normal size, and pouring with yellow mud, broken tree trunks, and the sodden carcasses of drowned sheep and other animals. The Italian Air Force was grounded and could offer no support, while a naval landing on the island of Corfu also had to be abandoned due to the weather. Meanwhile, the Italian supply system was also disintegrating. Ships arriving at the port of Durazzo, Albania, found it jammed to high heaven with ships delivering, of all things, blocks of marble. As well as fighting 2 wars, Mussolini was trying to keep his promise to turn Albanian cities into marble-clad icons of fascism. When eventually the ships could offload their vital war supplies, they were left piled up on the docks because of a lack of transport. Praska had been promised 1,750 lorries to transport said supplies. Instead, he got 107. Even most of these were soon out of action due to the terrible conditions of the roads and dirt tracks. Hardy mules might have saved the situation, which is exactly what the Greeks were using. But Mussolini had refused to send many because they were needed for the harvest back home. As supplies piled up at the quayside, Italy's cargo ships were being sent to the bottom of the Adriatic Sea. Greece's tiny fleet of 4 out-of-date submarines wreaked havoc, with just one of them sinking 27,000 tons of Italian shipping in a week. As the skies cleared and the sun came out, Praska boasted to Mussolini that, quote, "The Greeks have put up little resistance, or have run away, even leaving tables laid and hot food behind them." End quote. Ciano, a qualified pilot, was inspired to lead a bombing raid on Salonika, treating it like a jolly jape. It had little effect, and one of his bombs almost hit a building filled with interned Italians. There was only one little problem. Praska actually had no idea what was going on at the front lines, as he openly lied to his master. The Italian radio system had completely broken down. They were reduced to sending messengers back to Albania to let him know the situation. A 20th century army of a modern nation-state had been reduced to the messaging abilities of the Battle of Marathon. In reality, the situation was becoming increasingly dire. The Macedonian front in the north had been meant to remain relatively quiet while the action took place further south, but the Greeks had no intention of abiding by the Italian plans. They took the fight to the enemy. 3 Greek divisions forced back the Italian Ninth Army into wild rocky terrain that was largely inaccessible to tanks, trucks, or the favourite Italian light transport, the motorcycle. Meanwhile, Greek mountain cavalry, small agile horses accustomed to the most difficult footing, carried out lightning-quick sorties against the increasingly demoralised Italians. Then the final blow, as they cut off the Ninth Army by seizing a mountain held by Albanian volunteers. You shiver in your threadbare uniform, angry that you haven't been given proper warm clothing like the regular Italian troops have. You are an Albanian volunteer, promised rich rewards for an operation that was meant to be easy. Instead, you are stuck in these cursed mountains, shivering while the Greeks appear from seemingly nowhere and constantly attack. Your grumblings are interrupted when a shell smashes into your camp. The screams of the wounded following shortly after. As more follow, you desperately take cover, Then the Greeks come again, coming from a direction it would seem impossible to move men over. They pour into the camp, and the fighting quickly goes hand to hand. You hear a scream behind you and find one of your comrades lying dead, a Greek soldier standing over him with a bloody knife. You gun him down. While you're distracted, another barrels into you and knocks you to the floor. It's a brutal wrestling match. The Greek soldier seems to be possessed. He even bites your neck and arm. Finally, you kick him off and flee, leaving your gun behind. As your unit runs down the mountain terrified, your Italian officers at the bottom begin firing at you, demanding that you stand and fight. Some of the other Albanians who still have their weapons begin firing back at their own officers. Meanwhile, you are caught miserably in between this shooting match and the advancing Greek madmen. This really happened. Only 120 of the 1,000-man Albanian battalion remained in place when the shooting was over. The besieged Italians desperately waited for relief and reinforcements. It was a warning sign that the Greeks were not going to roll over and play dead. They had a ferocious national pride and a fighting will to match. The men took up arms, creating their own units or joining the main army. The women volunteered to act as bearers, scaling mountains with cannon parts and ammunition roped to their back. Quote, "We tie thick ropes around their waists," explained Warrant Officer Sibissis, "and policemen standing on higher levels pull them up, and these women, heavily loaded as they are, climb up like goats, now clinging to a rock, now grasping at a stray root, buckling under the weight of their load, and always in danger of falling into the precipice which opens below them." End quote. A New York Times war correspondent marvelled at the Greeks' will to resist. Quote, "Rickety trucks bounced to the front over impossible roads, bearing Hellenic fishermen and farmers. They rode to death and glory, with garlands over their ears and rifle muzzles stuffed with flowers, shouting, 'On to Rome!' Old mountain artillery was trundled along ridgecombs to shell the fascists in the valleys. Greek guard patrols attacked with their knives and teeth, biting the scared little Italian infantrymen. I visited a forward prisoner's cage that included dozens of frightened fascists with tooth wounds in their shabbily bandaged necks." End quote. When the army besieged the northern Macedonian front, and the southern front hopelessly bogged down due to Greek resistance, only units in the centre were continuing to make any progress. Even this success had massive red flashing lights all over it. The lack of decent maps meant the soldiers were hopelessly lost in the mountains, while their supply lines were non-existent. The advance was led by the elite Julia Alpini Division, the toughest and most professional soldiers on the whole front line. Yet even these elite had not received any supplies for 5 days, and were existing on dry biscuits. With empty stomachs they blundered blindly forward, while Greek women threw rocks and insults at them from above. Never mess with Greek women, they were as tough as nails. Sensing the Julia Division's weakness, the Greek commander, General Alexandros Papagos, the genius behind Greece's victories in this war, wheeled around on the right flank, pushing back the division covering the Julia's left flank and cutting their communications completely. These elite soldiers soon fell back in disarray and were virtually wiped out. Within less than a week, the Italians lost all the territory they had gained and were back exactly where they started from. Praska could hide the fiasco no more. He went cap in hand to Mussolini, begging for reinforcements. His master wasn't pleased, as you can probably guess. Praska was dismissed and sent into retirement. He had lasted only 11 days in command. I guess at least he could spend more time in the gym now. Mussolini ranted to Ciano that, quote, "Every man has made one fatal error in his life, and I made mine when I believed Visconti Prasca." End quote. He was replaced by someone just as incompetent. If Prasca was the overconfident jock, General Ubaldo Sotu was a theatre kid. I'm not sure why he joined the army in the first place. His great passion was not soldiering. It was creating soundtracks for imaginary movies. While Prasca had been pumping iron at crucial moments of the invasion, Sotu would also be unavailable, but because he was working on his music. When asked by German General Werner von Blomberg what his military philosophy was, he replied, quote, "When you have a fine plate of pasta, guaranteed for life, and a little music, you don't need anything more." End quote. Definitely wise words, but not what you want to hear from a general. It is noteworthy that it was after meeting General Sodu that Blomberg made his famous quote, "Victory in the next war would go to whoever didn't have the Italians on their side." While Sodu ate his pasta and composed music, the situation continued to deteriorate. On the morning of November the 14th, an international group of war correspondents were nearing the front lines, when suddenly terrified Italian soldiers ran past shouting, "They're crazy," an Italian reporter said. "They say the Greeks are coming." General Papagos had launched a counter-offensive along the entire front. Instead of risky frontal assaults, the Greeks would infiltrate through gaps in the overstretched Italian lines to fall on them from the flanks and in the rear. The Italians collapsed, soon fleeing so fast their cargo planes were inadvertently dropping supplies on the Greeks. "Our soldiers have fought little and badly," complained Ciano. The Italian retreat was a brutal experience for Mussolini's men. The biting cold snaps at your skin, your threadbare uniform offering no respite. Hungry, cold, and bone-tired, you stagger forwards. Discipline has broken down, your unit reduced to shuffling, bedraggled zombies. Some lose hope and just sit by the edge of the road, refusing to move. Your officer's too tired to order them to get up. All around you is evidence of the defeat of this once proud army. An Italian soldier lies dead on the road, a shell splinter having torn open the right side of his stomach, where the clotted blood has formed a huge, dark, filthy stain on his jacket. Further up is a tankette that's broken down and been abandoned by its crew. While walking past it is a drunken soldier, swaying and staggering all over the road, holding tightly to his chest a huge tin of tuna fish he's managed to salvage from somewhere. So much for triumphantly marching into Athens and the warm kisses of Greek women. Now it's a case of whether the cold or the angry Greeks will get you first. This is based on a real account of just how bad that retreat was. The Italian invasion of Greece had now turned into the defence of Albania. By the time the Greeks stopped advancing, mainly due to their overstretched supply lines, they had knocked the Italians back 50 miles and had penetrated 30 miles into southern and eastern Albania. In their most important victory, the Greeks captured the important Italian base at Koritsa, 20 miles inside Albania, shattering 3 Italian divisions and capturing 2,000 prisoners, 135 artillery pieces, and 300 machine guns. As the Greeks advanced, the worst winter in 2 decades fell upon the battlefield. Rain turned to sleet, and then to snow, and the temperature plunged to several degrees below zero. A biting north wind made it seem even colder if that was possible. Thousands of troops on both sides, ill prepared for the brutal weather, suffered severe frostbite. Weapons froze up and wouldn't fire. Uniforms became as stiff and brittle as parchment paper. At night, groups of shivering men dug deep holes and slept together, piled like cordwood beneath their blankets. During the day, some Italians took to killing their pack mules and stuffing their helmets with the dead animals' steaming brains. Others urinated on their hands to unstiffen their fingers. Sounds lovely. The merry-go-round of generals continued, with Soddu being fired and replaced by Ugo Cavallero. He has benefited historically from coming after the absolute disasters that were Prasca and Soddu. He's seen as one of Mussolini's better generals. But this really isn't saying much. He was the Littlefinger from Game of Thrones of the Italian army, always on the make and with multiple schemes running at the same time. He had spent his career on the lucrative revolving door between the Italian army and arms industry, earning the dubious nickname of the Profiteer General, after a scandal where he supplied the navy with steel and not armour plate, making a fortune in the process. While in Ethiopia, post-invasion, he failed to crush the guerrilla war that had broken out and was sacked by the governor, who denounced him as a self-serving liar. While a competent strategist, he had a distinct tendency to tell Mussolini what he wanted to hear. As much as he may have wanted to, even Cavallero couldn't hide the scale of the disaster, reporting that the shattered remnants of the Italian force had, quote, reserve rations, nil. Equipment, minimal. Woolen clothing, 0. Infantry ammunition, none. Artillery ammunition, insignificant. Arms, artillery, all supplies exhausted. Engineering equipment, practically nil. Medical equipment, non-existent. End quote. More than anything else, the defeat in Greece had damaged Mussolini's reputation beyond repair. Soldiers were refusing to get on ships to Albania, having to be forced on at gunpoint, while people were openly heckling when Mussolini appeared on newsreels at cinemas, seemingly having no fear of being caught. Internationally, he was now a laughingstock. At Menton, on the French-Italian border, a French joker put up a sign that advised, quote, "This is French territory. Greeks, don't pursue the Italians past this point," end quote, and burn. Soon the first Italian prisoners arrived in Athens. An old woman said, quote, "I feel sorry for them. They're not warriors. They should carry mandolins instead of rifles," end quote. As the front line stabilised, both sides' soldiers shivered together in trenches carved out of ice and frozen mud. Cases of frostbite numbered in the thousands. Particularly dreaded was the so-called dry gangrene, also known as the White Death. The affliction started painlessly, and men did not even know they had it, until they looked down and saw their feet and legs swollen to twice their size and turning black. Amputation was the only treatment, and hundreds died anyway in the overcrowded field hospitals. As his army suffered in the cold, Mussolini managed to reach a new low. While sipping wine with Ciano in his centrally heated office, he ranted that, quote, "This snow and cold are very good. In this way our good-for-nothing men and this mediocre race will be improved." End quote. The Greeks were also suffering from a lack of ammunition, and their men were living off a starvation diet of bread and olives. Worse, Metaxas had died. But their morale remained high, and they continued local attacks. Most famously, they captured the key crossroads village of Clissura, devastating the famous Lupi di Toscana, or Wolves of Tuscany division, in a driving snowstorm. After the defeat, cynics renamed them the Lepri di Toscana, or hares of Tuscany, as they sprinted away so fast. Mussolini's patience snapped. Wanting to end the running sore that Greece had become, he demanded a huge spring offensive. Albania was flooded with Italian reinforcements and supplies. Soon an army of 600,000 men had been assembled, far outnumbering the Greeks with just under 300,000 soldiers. And this time, Italy had a secret weapon. The Duce himself. Accepting no responsibility for the previous disasters, instead he blamed it all on his own soldiers and their lack of will. In yet another rant to Ciano, he yelled, quote, "The human material I have to work with is useless, worthless," end quote. To inspire his troops to victory, the fascist Superman that was Benito Mussolini would personally lead them into battle. Like a Roman emperor of old, he would march them to the gates of Athens. As Mussolini dreamt of being the next Caesar, the Duce's obsession was causing real problems for his military. They had barely been able to supply the troops they had in Greece before. Now, with a massively increased force, those problems were quadrupled, with more supplies piling up uselessly on the docks of Albanian ports. The quality of those 600,000 soldiers was also incredibly poor. While quantity does have a quality all of its own, most of the troops he was throwing at the Greeks had never used a hand grenade or a machine gun before. Many hadn't even fired a real gun before. Tactically, they had no idea, as they'd never been taught. If they didn't conquer by sheer force of numbers, a disaster was in the offing. Decked out in a bemedalled uniform that made him look like a Christmas tree, Il Duce toured the front, reviewed the troops, and made a brief visit to a field hospital. Leaning over the bed of one soldier whose stomach had been torn open by a Greek grenade, Mussolini beamed and yelled, "I am the Duce, and I bring you the greetings of the fatherland." "Well now, isn't that great?" the soldier retorted. Undeterred, Mussolini climbed to the top of a 2,500-foot hillside on March the 9th, 1941, to watch the long-awaited offensive begin. Some 50,000 soldiers massed in the Deniza Valley west of Klissura, while Italian artillery fired a ground-shaking 100,000 rounds at the Greek line in the space of 2 hours. Italian dive bombers contributed to the bombardment. Unfortunately for the attackers, the Greeks had already captured an Italian officer with a complete set of plans for the entire operation in his possession. The Italians were about to become sitting ducks. You crouch grimly in your trench as Italian shells pound all around you. Luckily, their aim is terrible, but as the ground shakes, it feels as though the explosions are drilling their way into your skull. Since the Italians invaded your land, you have trekked over mountains, survived the bitter cold, and battled fascists. But now they are coming back, even stronger. An Italian plane swoops down, and a bomb smashes into your trenches. Soldiers are even blown up into the air. An officer yells, "The macaroni boys are coming. Remember that you are Greeks, that you have beaten them before, and you will do so again." The Italians pour across the battlefield like a flood. You fire your machine gun and many fall. But still more replace the dead. Your machine gun runs hot, and you are firing practically at point-blank range when one Italian leaps into your trench. He fires his rifle, and you feel the hot bullet scratch your face, just missing your head. You ram your bayonet into his stomach as he screams in pain. The fighting goes hand to hand, shouts of "For Greece!" echoing from the defenders. For the next 5 days, the Italians made charge after charge against the Greek lines, with the fighting often going hand to hand, only to be driven back by the entrenched Greeks. Mussolini himself made several trips up and down the hillside to watch the attacks, carrying his marshal's baton with him like a stage prop. Once, a Greek fighter plane strafed the observation post, and the Duce was hustled into an air raid shelter. Aides reported to the public that he behaved courageously. In reality, he was terrified and turned pale with fear. Finally, on March the 16th, Mussolini and Cavallero called off the attack. 12,000 Italian casualties, that's 1,000 men per division, had been added to the list of the fallen in a campaign that had failed to regain a single foot of lost territory. 5 days later, Mussolini left Albania, telling his aide, quote, "I am disgusted by this environment. We have not advanced one step. They have been deceiving me to this very day. I have a profound contempt for all these people." End quote. Mussolini had run out of time for a solely Italian success. Instead, his German sugar daddy invaded Greece to secure his southern flank before he turned his armies on the Soviet Union. Trying to sugarcoat being bailed out by the Germans, Mussolini demanded a victory parade in Athens. Athenians still found a way to show their contempt, though. They politely clapped the Germans so they could meet the Italians with stone-cold silence. Some historians believe the 6 weeks Hitler wasted conquering Greece and Yugoslavia led to the failure of Operation Barbarossa. I wouldn't go that far. The USSR was far too strong to beat in one campaign. But what it could have done is cost Hitler the chance to take Moscow before the winter descended. Fascist Italy never recovered from the Greek debacle. The easy victory Mussolini and Ciano had promised instead turned into a humiliating defeat and cost Italy over 100,000 casualties. Humiliated before the world, Mussolini's regime was now very much a German satellite. Even worse, the Greek front had been prioritised for manpower and supplies. This meant that North Africa, where he was fighting the British, was neglected. This directly led to further disasters in this crucial theatre. The 3 generals who failed to beat Greece went on to varied ends. Prasca turned against Mussolini and fought with the Italian resistance, before being captured and sent to a POW camp in Germany. He would end up having a first-class seat as the Red Army captured Berlin. He later volunteered to lead the new Italian military after the war, but was politely told, "No way in hell." Sotu was retired. While he remained loyal to the fascist regime until the bitter end, he was never called back to service. Cavallero had an appropriately Littlefinger-like fate. When Mussolini was dismissed and arrested, Cavallero was too. His hated predecessor as army chief and fellow marshal of Italy, Badoglio, had become head of the government, and Cavallero was accused of plotting a fascist counter-coup. In September 1943, while held in Rome's military prison, he wrote a memo in which he claimed that he himself had been preparing a coup to remove Mussolini and install his old rival instead. It was all a misunderstanding. He'd really been an anti-fascist all this time. He really had no shame. Freed from prison by the Germans when they took control, Cavallero was wined and dined by Field Marshal Kesselring. The following day he was found mysteriously dead, perhaps because that unfortunate memo had just been discovered the day before. Greece, the heroics of her people, won the respect of the world, with Churchill proclaiming that, quote, "Today we say that Greeks fight like heroes. From now on, we will say that heroes fight like Greeks." End quote. They took over 80,000 casualties and were defeated by the Germans and their Bulgarian allies, but their will to be free could not be crushed, despite a horrific occupation. When the war turned against the Axis, the fascists would once again flee from their land, harassed by the Greek resistance. Appropriately, Metaxas's famous No is still celebrated as a national holiday to this day. Thank you for listening. To help the podcast grow, please like, leave a review, or tell a friend. If there's a war you'd like me to cover, just send me an email to bartonjames84 at proton.m for mother, E for echo. In the last episode of this series, Mussolini decides to join the German invasion of the Soviet Union. It starts off well for a change, despite incompetent generals and Mussolini's meddling. But that all changes as the Germans head towards a city called Stalingrad. See you next time for more Forgotten Wars.